Hello, fellow writers. Today we're going to take a look at style, and I thought what we would do was just kind of look at the style considerations in a piece of journalism. In most discussions about style, there's kind of an option among three different styles: the low style, the medium style or middle style, and high style. And the kind of differences between them are small and subtle, but basically important, depending on the type of reading that you're doing, of writing that you're doing rather, depending on the audience that you're trying to reach or the subject matter of your writing. You might pick a high style, a more formal style, or you might pick something that is very low style, very accessible, very kind of breezy and colloquial, let's say. But most of the time, you're somewhere in between that, even in academic writing. You don't want to be so inaccessible that readers don't understand what you're saying or have to look up a lot of information that you're putting out there just because of the way you've written it. So generally, you're going to be in kind of a middle style, which means you'll probably have some characteristics of a more colloquial or accessible or conversational kind of writing style. And then a formal structure that actually uses good, solid style in terms of sentence structure, for example, and organizing of your ideas. So you can see on the screen here we have an essay from the opinion pages of the Sunday Review section of the New York Times. And this is a good place to look at style. The op-ed writers, columnists who write for the New York Times, do this all the time. They have columns that they are responsible to put into the paper every few days in most cases. And in this case, it's Thomas L. Friedman, one of the foremost columnists who is writing today. And he writes for the New York Times. And in this instance, we're looking at his column for the Sunday before the 2012 elections. And at this point, while we're recording, we don't know how those elections will come out. They will take place in a few days, and then we will know. And that is the subject of Thomas L. Friedman's column here. He is trying to look ahead to see what the impact will be of whatever way the election goes, whichever candidate wins, what is going to be the impact of that. And he has a very kind of middle-of-the-road approach to the way he's looking at it. He's a fairly middle-of-the-road kind of columnist, doesn't have an extreme opinion about a lot of things. He has strong opinions, but they aren't grounded in any one political or partisan kind of expression for the most part. So he tries to express his opinions from his own perspective rather than representing the perspectives of a political party, for example. So that's for a good reason to look at him. And this column is about the morning after the morning after. In other words, what happens after the election is over and where are we going to be when we sit around and assess what has happened as a result of this intensely fought election between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. So that is the subject of his column, and we're not so much looking at the content or the opinion or his ability to convince us of anything in this particular essay. What we want to look at here is style. How is Thomas Friedman gauging his writing in relation to the audience that he expects to read what he has written, and in relation to the subject matter of his column, it's politics. Okay, and I would argue that in this particular column we're seeing a very good example of middle style. We don't have high formal writing here, nor do we have careless, casual, slang-filled colloquial writing here. We have something in between. So it's a good example to just kind of run through, and we'll look through most of it, and we'll just kind of make some comments about the style and see if we can learn something about how a style is approached and how it comes about in a good example of a columnist who's writing something for a general audience. Okay, so let's begin with this. We'll scroll down a little bit here to get to the beginning of the first paragraph and scroll down a little bit. So he starts out saying, there are two things I'll predict about Tuesday's election. One is that America's biggest voting bloc, the center-right, center-left, will win. The other is that there's going to be a big civil war within the Republican Party and a small civil war within the Democratic Party starting the day after the election, as they're each forced to accommodate this center-left, center-right victory. Okay, so it's an interesting approach he's taking here, that the center-right, center-left is going to be the big winner in the contest. So the extremes will probably be unhappy one way or the other, okay, or at least not the winners of the election. Okay, so what about the style here? Okay, he starts out with a style that is sometimes recommended against. There are two things. Generally speaking, or often in academic writing or formal writing, we don't want to say there are two things that I'll predict. So that's kind of colloquial. That's conversational. That's the way you might speak, but not the way you would write if you were writing something very formal for an academic audience, for example. So that's a good indication of the middle style here. On the other part of the structure of this particular piece of writing, we have a very complicated sentence here. This is one sentence. This is a paragraph-long sentence, which is not all that uncommon in journalism. But as we can see, it's a complex and complicated sentence. We have the first part of the sentence going all the way down to right about here, after the word when, and then we have a semicolon. And the semicolon indicates that we're going to have another independent clause joined to the first independent clause here in a complicated sentence. So it won't be a run-on sentence. And so he does have a fairly complicated structure here. But again, the conversational tone takes away the kind of intimidating factor that we might have if we were to say this is a pretty long sentence, I don't know if I can get through it or not. Okay, that's enough about the style of the first paragraph. Let's see what else we can find as we scan down through here. By now it should be obvious how much America is a center-right, center-left country, and how much this center, not the extremes, has dominated this election. Nothing particularly noteworthy about that sentence, one way or the other. It's pretty straightforward. It's not hard to understand. It's not formal. It's not informal. It's more or less a straightforward sentence. So let's go on to the next one. If Mitt Romney wins on Tuesday, it would be because he moved from the far right, Tea Party dictated nonsense that he used to win the GOP primary to the center right. Okay, so he's kind of gotten a little less formal here as he uses the word nonsense, a value-laden word to be sure, certainly one that has a lot of opinions attached to it, indicating that he disapproves of the far right of the Republican Party, the Tea Party kind of philosophy. And so he clearly calls it what he believes it to be, and that is nonsense. And that's not a word that you would necessarily use in formal prose. So here again we have an example of sort of something in between informal and formal. Next sentence. Had Romney not rebranded himself a centrist Republican in the last month, this election would have been over long ago, in President Obama's favor. Again, a sentence that's fairly straightforward. So we'll move on. Conversely, let's just scroll up a little bit. Had Romney run as an authentic center-right former Republican governor of Massachusetts from the start, this election might long ago have been over in his favor. This is very conversational kind of prose, is it not? I think we're getting a sense of someone who could be speaking to us. Mr. Friedman is a very eloquent speaker, and he speaks very often very similarly to the way he writes, okay, with a lot of expression and a lot of accessibility. He's not trying to go over our heads with any of this, and that pretty much comes through here again. So a middle style is what we have. Had Obama, though, it goes the next sentence, embraced the Simpson-Bowles deficit reduction plan and run from the center from the start, Romney would have been locked out on the fringes long ago and never been able to pull off his born-again move to moderation. Again, very conversational. Might say that there's a little bit of sort of a colloquial thing here, might have been locked out on the fringes, and a good accessible kind of prose again that reaches his readers very, very well. Obama may still squeak by, though, by stressing his balanced approach to lowering the deficit and pragmatic foreign policy, while downplaying his more leftward initiatives like health care. Okay, what about that sentence? There is a little bit of a colloquial expression in there. Squeak by is not something that, again, you would expect to see in a very formal academic kind of piece of writing. So again, like an accessible, conversational, Obama may still squeak by. Another example of the kind of style that opens it up to the reader, says, I'm talking to you on a level that anyone could easily understand. Okay, let's move on to the next paragraph. The reason the center-left, center-right bloc is dominating this election is because it intuitively knows that the only way our country can progress is with some grand bargains forged at the center. Nothing particularly noteworthy about that. Again, another straightforward sentence. One is a package deal that shows enlightenment in defense spending, raises taxes, invests in the infrastructure, education and research, and institutes tax reforms that unleash more entrepreneurship. A package deal. So we've got a phrase there, package deal, that sounds a little informal again, fairly conversational. And that actually picks up, again, in the next two sentences, the next two sentences. Another is a deal on immigration reform. The third is a deal that opens the way to exploit our newfound bounty of natural gas, but with a plan that is environmentally sound and doesn't divert us from our long-term goal of a clean energy economy that mitigates climate change. Okay, so there we have the parallel structure of the use of the word deal, a package deal, a deal on immigration reform, a deal that opens the way, and so on and so forth. So that's a very good literary device and something that we might use or might not use in conversation, but it's not overpoweringly formal. It's still very accessible. We can easily understand it. Okay. Then we get down to here with a word that might arguably be a little bit less understood by some readers, although I think most would. The word mitigate. Mitigates climate change. Now that would be a word you might find in formal academic writing, and you wouldn't find probably in informal writing, and you sometimes might avoid that in conversation. So there's a little bit of a touch of taking the style up a notch, perhaps, in that little use of the word mitigates. Let's go on down to the next paragraph. If Romney wins, it would be because the center-right, center-left concluded that he would approach these grand bargains with the moderate Republican instincts and willingness to compromise that he has been either faking or sincerely projecting in the last month, and would be able to impose that moderation on his party. Perhaps you could argue that the word faking is less formal and conversational, again, an accessible kind of thing. He's either been faking it or he's sincere about it, okay? But otherwise, a pretty straightforward sentence. If Obama wins, it would be because the center-right, center-left concluded that he has been trying to govern from the center, has made progress, but has also been obstructed by GOP hardliners, and they wanted to give him more time. Okay, nothing particularly noteworthy there. Good sentence. Nothing particular style-wise, formal or informal about it. A lot has been written lately about how, given these two options, we'd be better off going with Romney because he supposedly can control the crazies in his party to deliver his side of these grand bargains, but by sticking with Obama, we'd only get more gridlock. Crazies, okay, instead of characterizing the far right, as he's kind of already alluded to, someone that he is some part of the Republican Party that he is opposed to or does not agree with. He's just flat out calling them crazies. You mentioned nonsense before. So he's using a very kind of colloquial style here to make a point about his disdain for that particular part of the political spectrum. And he's very informal, almost slang, using the word crazies in that particular instance. But it's very effective and it works, and it heightens the intensity of what he's saying here to express a strong opinion, but not with a formal kind of style. Now here's another informal phrase. I don't buy that for two reasons. I don't buy that is something that you probably wouldn't, again, find in very formal academic writing. First, it would be saying that since Republicans on the far right managed to obstruct Obama on many fronts and held the economy hostage, we should let them rule because otherwise they'd do it again. A sort of a formal sentence there. If we say obstruct rather than block or prevent Obama from doing certain things and so forth. Obstruct is a good academic word, but it's also not something that's inaccessible. Okay, so moving on. That would only invite Democrats to behave the same way, which would leave us nowhere. Pretty straightforward sentence. Leave us nowhere, perhaps somewhat informal. I also don't buy it, again using that phrase, because I think the GOP has gone so much farther to the right than the Democrats have gone to the left. I do not trust that Romney will be able to tame the radical GOP base without making concessions to it on the environment, the Supreme Court, and foreign policy that are not in the nation's long-term interest. Okay, we're going to actually stop there because I think we've made the point. We don't need to go find every example of middle road style writing here in this essay to make the point, but as you can see, there is a middle ground between the more formal writing that you might find in a very serious piece of academia, academic writing to an audience that's very highly educated and erudite, and the more slang and really conversational and perhaps colloquial, as we might call it, expression that you might use if you were kind of doing something more whimsical or humorous, or something that you were directing toward an audience that was not expected to be taking you seriously or taking these issues all that seriously. So in Thomas L. Friedman here, we have a very good example of middle style. The things that you can do, that you want to try to incorporate, depending on your audience that you are writing for and the subject matter and some other considerations that you would take into account in determining the style that you want to use in your writing.